Welcome to Trending Unpacked, the show where we explore the stories behind the trends shaping our world.
Great to be digging into things again.
Absolutely. And today we're unpacking something that, well, it feels like it's always trending in certain circles, but it's definitely buzzing right now. We're talking about the H-1B visa.
The H-1B. Yeah, it sits right at this fascinating intersection, doesn't it? You've got tech innovation, global talent flow, and, of course, some pretty intense political debate wrapped up in it.
Exactly. And it feels particularly relevant now, maybe because of the upcoming U.S. elections and just the constant shifts in immigration policy we seem to be seeing globally.
For sure. Understanding the H-1B, it's really key if you're tracking anything related to tech competitiveness, the future of work, how the U.S. positions itself, really. It's much more than just, a visa category. It's a signal.
Right. So our plan today is pretty straightforward. We want to get into the nitty-gritty. What is the H-1B visa technically? How does it work?
The mechanics, yeah.
Then look at who uses it, why it's causing such tension right now in this 2025 context.
And also touch on how people are talking about it online, the different narratives swirling around.
Precisely. Synthesize those conflicting views we're seeing in the source material. So let's dive in, maybe start with the absolute basics, lay the foundation.
Sounds good. You can't really get the arguments without understanding the rules of the game first.
Okay, so foundation. First thing to grasp, and you mentioned this, it's a non-immigrant visa. That seems crucial.
Absolutely fundamental. Non-immigrant. That means it's temporary by design. It's not a green card. It's not permanent residency. And it's definitely not citizenship, not automatically anyway. Think of it as an extended work permit.
Okay. And its specific purpose. It's not for just any job.
No, not at all. It was established back in 1990 under the Immigration and Nationality Act, or INA. And the explicit goal is to let U.S. companies hire foreign workers, but only for what the law calls specialty occupations.
Specialty occupations. That sounds like where the definition really matters. What does that actually mean in practice?
It's pretty specific, and yeah, it's often where the friction starts. The job itself has to demand theoretical and practical application of a body of highly specialized knowledge.
Okay.
And critically, the minimum requirement for someone entering that specific job role, like the baseline, has to be at least a bachelor's degree, or sometimes its equivalent, in that specific specialty.
So it's not just having any bachelor's degree. It has to be directly relevant.
Directly relevant to the specialized duties, yes. The whole idea is filtering for expertise that theoretically isn't readily available in the U.S. domestic labor market at that moment.
Give me an example. What kind of role are we talking about?
Oh, think like a very specific type of software architect, maybe working on cutting-edge AI, or a biostatistician, a chemical engineer working on a novel process, maybe certain types of financial quants, or even, say, a specialized physician for a research hospital.
Got it. And the company wanting to hire this person, they have to prove this.
They do. The petitioning company has to demonstrate that the job itself is complex enough to require this level of specialized knowledge. This often involves submitting, incredibly detailed job descriptions, comparing the role to industry standards, sometimes providing expert opinions.
So if a company tries to get an H-1B for, say, a general administrative assistant, even if the person they want to hire has a PhD,
it's likely going to get rejected because the job duties themselves probably don't meet that specialty occupation threshold, regardless of the applicant's qualifications. It's a common point of confusion. Yeah. The job dictates it.
Okay, that makes sense. It's a high bar. And then there's the time limit. You said temporary. How temporary?
Typically, the initial visa is granted for up to 3 years.
3 years, okay.
But it is extendable. You can usually get extensions, typically in 3-year increments again, but there's a maximum.
Which is?
Generally 6 years total in H-1B status. That 6-year clock is a really big deal.
6 years max. That doesn't seem like that long if you're building a career, maybe starting a family.
Exactly, and this is where the system gets incredibly complex and, frankly, stressful for the visa holders. The 6-year limit isn't always a hard stop if certain steps towards permanent residency, towards getting a green card, have been taken.
Ah, okay. So the H-1B is temporary, but it can be a bridge to a green card?
It's often intended to be, yes, but the bridge can be very, very long and very uncertain. To extend the H-1B beyond that 6-year limit, the worker generally needs to have reached a specific stage in the green card application process.
And what's that stage? What's the technical trigger?
Okay, so basically, either the employer has filed what's called an I-140 petition, that's the immigrant petition for alien worker, and it's been approved, or the very first stage of the employment-based green card process, the labor certification or PRM process, must have been filed at least 365 days before the 6-year H-1B limit is reached.
Wow, okay. That sounds complicated.
It is, and it effectively ties the worker to that specific employer who's sponsoring their green card application.
Hmm.
If they want to keep extending their H-1B status while they wait, potentially for years or even decades, for the green card, they often have to stick with that sponsoring employer.
It sounds like it creates a huge power imbalance.
It absolutely can. We'll probably circle back to that. But even before you get to the 6-year limit and the green card wait, there's an even bigger hurdle for most people just getting the H-1B in the first place.
Right, the famous cap, the
It's
lottery.
the annual cap, yeah. This is what generates all the headlines every April. The U.S. government sets a strict limit on the number of new H-1Bs it will issue each fiscal year.
And that number is
It's currently set by Congress at 85,000 per year. Total.
85,000. How does that compare to, like, the demand?
Oh, it's dwarfed by demand. In recent years, the number of applications or registrations has often exceeded 400,000, sometimes significantly more. So your chances of getting selected are, well, not great. It's literally a lottery.
A lottery for 85,000 spots out of potentially 500,000 applicants?
Essentially, yes. And that 85,000 isn't even one single pool. It's broken down further.
How so?
There's the, let's call it the regular cap, which is 65,000 visas.
Okay.
But then there's an additional 20,000 visas set aside specifically for applicants who have earned a master's degree or higher from a U.S. university.
Ah, the master's cap. So there's an advantage built in if you got your advanced degree in the States.
A significant advantage. Because those with U.S. master's degrees or PhDs are first put into the lottery for the 20,000 advanced degree spots. If they aren't selected there, they then get rolled into the lottery pool for the regular 65,000 spots.
So they effectively get 2 bites at the apple.
Exactly. It's a deliberate policy choice to try and retain talent that the U.S. education system has already invested in.
That makes sense from that perspective. So who is actually using these limited H-1B spots? Which industries rely on this visa the most?
Well, the reliance isn't evenly spread. It's heavily concentrated in a few key high-skill sectors. Number one, overwhelmingly, is technology. Think software engineers, data scientists, semiconductor designers, AI researchers. Silicon Valley runs heavily on H-1B talent, but so do tech hubs all across the country.
Okay, tech is the big one. What else?
Healthcare is another major user. Specialized physicians, medical researchers, physical therapists, especially in areas that might be underserved by domestic doctors. Think rural hospitals or specialized research centers.
Tech, healthcare.
Then finance. Particularly in areas like quantitative analysis, financial modeling, risk management, roles requiring really advanced mathematical or computational skills often draw H-1B talent.
Right.
And fourth, I'd say research more broadly. Across universities, private R&D labs, pharmaceutical companies, a lot of postdocs and research scientists doing fundamental work rely on the H-1B visa to be in the U.S.
So it's concentrated in these really high-skill, often STEM-focused fields.
Predominantly, yes. And that concentration is why restricting the H-1B flow isn't just an immigration issue. It has immediate ripple effects on the competitiveness of these core U.S. industries.
Which leads us directly into the policy tensions we're seeing now in 2025. It sounds like this structure, the cap, the lottery, the definition of specialty occupation is under a lot of stress.
Tremendous stress. You basically have this clash between enormous economic demand from those industries we just mentioned and then concerns about protecting the domestic labor market, preventing potential exploitation, ensuring fairness. It's a constant tug of war.
Okay, let's break down those flashpoints. The sources point to the great cap debate first. Should that 85,000 number change?
That's the perennial question. On one side, you have industry groups, particularly tech, arguing forcefully that the 85,000 cap is archaic. It was set decades ago and hasn't kept pace with the growth of the digital economy or specialized fields.
Their argument being
That the cap is artificially strangling innovation and economic growth. They say they simply can't find enough qualified domestic talent for certain highly specialized roles fast enough, and the low cap forces them to either slow down projects or, worse, move R&D or even whole teams offshore to countries with more flexible visa policies. They see it as a self-inflicted wound on U.S. competitiveness.
okay, that's the raise the cap argument. What's the counter? Keep it the same. Lower it.
The counter-arguments vary. Some labor advocates argue the cap should stay fixed or potentially even be reduced, arguing that increasing it just makes a larger pool of workers potentially vulnerable to lower wages or exploitation and could displace American workers.
Right, the displacement concern.
Then there's a third perspective gaining traction, which is less about the number and more about the system. They argue maybe the fixed annual quota itself is the problem. Perhaps it should be more dynamic, adjusting based on specific economic needs, unemployment rates in certain fields, or maybe prioritizing certain skills.
So moving away from a flat number to something more targeted.
Exactly. Which ties into the next big point of contention, the selection system itself, that random lottery.
Yeah, picking 85,000 names out of a hat from potentially 500,000 applications seems kind of arbitrary for something so economically significant.
That's the core criticism. The lottery treats all applications equally, regardless of the proposed salary, the level of skill specialization, or the strategic importance of the role to the economy. An entry-level IT staffing position that meets the bare minimum requirements has the same random chance as, say, a Nobel laureate-level researcher being hired by a top university.
That randomness does seem counterintuitive if the goal is attracting the best talent.
And it's led to accusations, particularly against some large IT outsourcing or consulting firms, that they kind of game the system.
Yeah.
The critique is that some firms allegedly flood the lottery with a massive number of applications, often for roles that might be considered more generic or lower paid within the specialty definition. They aren't necessarily competing on the uniqueness of the talent, but playing a volume game, hoping to win a certain percentage of visas through sheer luck and scale, which they then contract out. Critics argue this isn't what the visa was intended for.
Okay, so if the lottery is seen as flawed, what's the alternative being discussed? You mentioned merit-based systems.
Right. This is a huge focus of reform discussions. Instead of a random draw, a merit-based system would rank applications based on specific criteria.
Like what kind of criteria?
Most commonly proposed is salary. Prioritize the applications offering the highest wages, well above the minimum required prevailing wage.
The logic being higher salary usually correlates with higher skill or higher demand.
That's the idea. Or you could prioritize specific advanced degrees, maybe STEM PhDs, or experience in fields deemed critical to national interest, like AI or green energy tech. The goal is to make the selection process align directly with perceived economic value or strategic need, rather than random chance.
That sounds like it would directly address the wage suppression argument too, right? If you're prioritizing high wage offers.
Theoretically, yes. That's a major selling point for merit-based proposals. It aims to counter the critique that the H-1B is used to undercut domestic wages. But let's dig into that wage issue itself because it's complex.
Yeah, the sources mention employers have to pay the prevailing wage. Why isn't there enough, according to critics?
It's a really technical but crucial point. Before filing the H-1B petition, the employer has to get something called a labor condition application, an LCA, certified by the Department of Labor. Part of that LCA is attesting they will pay the H-1B worker at least the prevailing wage for that specific job in that specific geographic location.
Okay, sounds reasonable. So what's the problem?
The problem often lies in how that prevailing wage is calculated and defined. The Department of Labor typically uses wage surveys, but these surveys might lag behind real-time market rates, especially in fast-moving fields like tech.
So the prevailing wage might actually be below the current market rate.
It can be, yeah. Or the job categories used in the surveys might be too broad. For example, the prevailing wage for a software developer might lump together someone doing basic coding with a highly specialized cloud architect. An employer could legally pay the H-1B architect the lower, more general developer prevailing wage for that area, saving costs compared to hiring a U.S. worker who would command the true market rate for that specific high-end skill set.
Ah, I see. So the wage floor might not be high enough to prevent some level of undercutting in certain cases.
That's the core of the labor critique. It creates this tension. Employers pushing for flexibility and access to talent they say they need.
And labor advocates raising flags about potential exploitation, wage effects, and that power imbalance we mentioned earlier, where the worker's visa status is tied to the employer.
Exactly. The worker might be hesitant to negotiate for a higher salary or push back on poor conditions if their very ability to stay in the country depends on keeping that specific sponsor happy.
That's a vulnerable position.
Definitely. And incredibly, even if a worker navigates the cap, the lottery, the specialty occupation rules, the prevailing wage checks, the uncertainty is far from over.
Yeah.
There's this massive issue looming for many. The permanent residency bottleneck.
The green card backlog. This sounds like maybe the most stressful part of the whole thing for the actual people involved.
For many, it absolutely is. It's maybe the defining structural problem causing long-term anxiety. The issue isn't just that getting a green card takes time, it's the per-country limits imposed on employment-based green cards.
Per country limits, how does that work?
U.S. immigration law states that in any given year, immigrants from any single country cannot receive more than 7% of the total number of employment-based green cards available that year.
Okay, 7% per country. What's the impact of that?
Well, think about where a large percentage of H-1B workers come from. Because of huge populations and strong STEM education systems, countries like India and China contribute a very large share of the high-skilled workers applying for employment-based green cards.
Right, so if tons of people from, say, India are applying, but India can only get 7% of the total green cards issued each year.
You get a backlog, a massive crushing backlog, for highly skilled workers from India applying today in certain categories. The estimated wait time for their green card priority date to become current is not years, it's decades, sometimes projected at 50, 70 years or even longer based on current processing rates and quotas.
Decades. So someone could get an H-1B, work in the U.S. for their entire career, maybe raise a family here, all while technically being a temporary non-immigrant worker waiting in a queue that might never move.
That is precisely the situation for tens, maybe hundreds of thousands of people right now. They're living and working in the U.S., often for decades, stuck in this limbo state because of the per-country caps interacting with the high volume from certain nations.
That level of uncertainty must be paralyzing.
It's incredibly corrosive. Professionally, it might mean you feel you can't leave a job you've outgrown or that isn't challenging anymore because your green card application is tied to that employer. Changing jobs often means restarting parts of the complex green card process, potentially losing your place in that decades-long line.
Wow.
Personally, it affects everything. Buying a home, planning for retirement, even decisions about family, like whether a spouse can work easily. It hangs over everything. And it raises serious questions about whether the U.S. can realistically retain the top global talent it attracts if it subjects them to this level of prolonged instability. #3. Internet reactions and cultural interpretations.
Okay, so we've got the mechanics, the caps, the green card backlog.
Yeah.
This complex, often fraught system. Now let's pivot to how this plays out in the public square, particularly online. The sources definitely show this isn't just a policy debate, it's a cultural one too, right?
Oh, absolutely. The online discourse around the H-1B is incredibly polarized. You see these two dominant, often completely opposing narratives clashing constantly on social media, in forums, comment sections.
And sounds like the technical nuances we just discussed, the per-country caps, the LCA process, often get lost in that online debate.
Almost entirely. The online discussion tends to focus on the bigger, more emotionally charged questions. Is it fair? Is it good for America? Are they taking our jobs? Or are they driving innovation? It operates at a much higher, often less informed level.
Let's unpack those two narratives. First, the supporters. We could call this the innovation thesis. What's their core argument?
The core argument is pretty straightforward. The H-1B visa is an essential tool for maintaining American technological leadership and economic dynamism. They see the U.S. as needing to be a magnet for the world's best and brightest.
And the H-1B is the mechanism for that.
It's a key mechanism, yeah. They argue it allows U.S. companies to fill critical skill gaps, particularly in fast-evolving STEM fields where the domestic pipeline, universities and training programs, just can't produce qualified candidates fast enough or in sufficient numbers. Think specialized AI skills, quantum computing, advanced biotech.
So it's about filling gaps the U.S. workforce can't currently fill itself.
That's part of it, but the argument goes further. It's not just about filling existing jobs. It's about driving new innovation and growth.
How so? What's the evidence they point to?
There's a fair amount of research highlighted in the sources. Studies consistently show that high-skilled immigrants, including many who initially arrive on H-1Bs, have significantly higher rates of entrepreneurship, starting companies, and patent creation compared to the native-born population.
So they're not just employees, they're potentially creators of future jobs and technologies.
That's the core claim. You see statistics like, over half of America's billion-dollar startups having at least one immigrant founder, or immigrants being disproportionately represented among patent holders in key tech sectors. The argument is that these individuals are net contributors, creating wealth, creating jobs, pushing the innovation frontier forward.
And this connects directly to global competitiveness, right? The idea that if the U.S. doesn't attract this talent, someone else will.
Exactly. Supporters view the H-1B system, even with its flaws, as crucial for staying ahead of competitors like China, Canada, Germany, who are all actively trying to recruit the same pool of global talent, often with, frankly, more streamlined and predictable immigration pathways.
So from this perspective, the 85,000 cap isn't protecting American jobs, it's potentially hamstringing American innovation.
That's precisely their view. They see it as an artificial constraint in a global talent war. They'd argue for raising the cap significantly or making the system more responsive to economic demand.
Okay, that's a clear picture of the innovation thesis. Now let's flip the coin. What about the critics? What's their main narrative? We can call it the labor concerns viewpoint.
This side views the H-1B program very differently, not primarily as an innovation engine, but potentially as a tool used by corporations to lower labor costs and, in some cases, displace American workers.
The wage suppression argument we touched on earlier is key here.
It's central. Critics point to the prevailing wage issue, arguing that allowing companies to hire H-1B workers at potentially below market rates puts downward pressure on wages for everyone in those occupations, including U.S. workers. They argue it gives companies leverage to keep salaries lower than they would be in a purely domestic labor market.
And they focus particularly on those large outsourcing firms you mentioned.
Yes, the criticism is often sharpest against companies, sometimes called H1B dependent employers, whose business model seems heavily reliant on importing large numbers of IT workers, often at those lower prevailing wage tiers, level 1 or level 2 wages technically. The argument is that these firms aren't using the visa for truly unique, hard to find talent, but more for cost arbitrage on relatively standard IT roles.
Undercutting the market price for IT labor.
That's the accusation, and it fuels the broader concern about job displacement.
Tell me more about that. When does displacement become a major talking point?
Especially during economic downturns or when news breaks of large companies having layoffs. Critics argue that some companies lay off experienced, often more expensive American workers, only to then fill similar roles with H-1B workers, perhaps hired directly or, more commonly, through those third-party contracting firms, often at a lower overall cost.
That sounds like exactly the kind of story that would ignite public anger.
Absolutely. And whether it's widespread or anecdotal, those stories fuel the perception that the H-1B system, as currently structured, can harm American workers' job security and earning potential.
So the critics aren't necessarily against all high-skilled immigration, but they're very concerned about the potential for misuse within the current H-1B framework.
Precisely. Their focus is often on reforming the system to add stronger protections for domestic workers. Things like raising the wage requirements significantly, increasing enforcement against fraud, maybe requiring companies to prove they made rigorous efforts to recruit Americans first before turning to H-1Bs.
Okay, so we have these two big conflicting narratives playing out online. But the internet isn't just about policy debates. It's also where people share their lived experiences. What do the sources tell us about how H-1B holders themselves use online spaces?
These online communities, forums, social media groups, dedicated websites, they are absolutely critical lifelines for H-1B workers and their families. They're not just places to vent, they're essential for practical information sharing.
Like what kind of information?
Everything, really. Navigating the incredibly complex U.S. immigration bureaucracy which forms to file, typical processing times, what to do if you get a bad elevation. Request for evidence. Sharing tips on which lawyers are good, which employers are stable versus those known for layoffs. Tracking the monthly visa bulletin, which controls the green card backlog. That's a huge focus.
It's a crowdsourced survival guide almost.
In many ways, yes. And it's also a place to share the common struggles and anxieties that come with living under the system.
What are some of those shared challenges that really stand out in these online discussions?
The constant uncertainty is probably number one. The anxiety around visa renewals, potential layoffs, meaning you might have only 60 days to find a new sponsoring employer or leave the country. The sheer stress of the green card backlog. We talked about people sharing their priority dates from years ago and calculating how many more decades they might have to wait.
That documentary anxiety must be pervasive. How does it impact daily life?
Profoundly. We mentioned the difficulty buying a house due to uncertain long-term status, but it's also things like hesitancy to change jobs even for a better opportunity because of the green card implications. The strain on families is huge, too. H-4 visas, for dependents, often come with work restrictions, meaning spouses, who might be highly qualified themselves, face career interruptions or are unable to work at all for extended periods. This creates financial and personal stress.
So it's a constant juggling act, managing career, family, and this complex legal status.
Absolutely. But it's important to note, it's not all struggle and anxiety shared online. There's also a strong element of mutual support and celebration of successes.
Success stories. Like what?
Yeah, people share when they finally get their green card after a decade-long wait. They share stories of career advancement, promotions, achieving professional goals that might not have been possible in their home countries. They celebrate the opportunities the H-1B, despite all its challenges, did provide. These stories offer hope and encouragement to others still navigating the system.
So it's a mix. The frustration is real, but so is the sense of opportunity for those who make it work.
Definitely. And looking at this whole online ecosystem, the policy debates, the personal stories, it's clear the H-1B issue taps into something much bigger than just labor economics, doesn't it?
It feels like it. How does it connect to broader cultural themes?
Well, it forces conversations about fundamental questions. What does it mean to be competitive globally? How much should we prioritize domestic workers versus seeking talent worldwide? It gets tangled up in debates about nationalism versus globalism, Is immigration, even high-skilled immigration, fundamentally changing the cultural fabric, and is that good or bad? The H-1B becomes a sort of lightning rod for all these deeper anxieties and debates about America's identity and place in the world.
A microcosm of the entire globalization debate almost.
In many ways, yes. It pits economic arguments for openness against cultural and political arguments for tighter control. And understanding that deeper resonance is key when we try to analyze where policy might actually go. #4, analysis and takeaway.
Okay, let's try to synthesize all this now. We've got the mechanics, the debates, the human element. Let's look at the big picture impact, starting with that core tension, the impact matrix. How do we balance the push for global talent and innovation against the concerns about wages and jobs?
It's incredibly tricky, and honestly, the economic research itself often presents conflicting findings depending on how you slice the data.
What does the pro-innovation side show?
Well, there are credible studies, as mentioned in the sources, showing a positive correlation between high-skilled immigration, including H-1B workers, and outcomes like increased patenting, higher rates of entrepreneurship, and even overall job growth in specific high-tech regions like Silicon Valley. The argument is that these workers aren't just filling jobs, they're often creating new ones through innovation and starting companies. They contribute more than they take in this view.
So a positive impact on the economy overall, especially in the long run.
That's the argument. But then you have the counter research.
Right, the study showing negative wage effects or displacement.
Yes. That research often finds negative impacts tend to be concentrated in specific segments. For example, maybe in entry-level IT roles, or within companies that heavily utilize those lower prevailing wage levels we discussed. It suggests that the negative effects might not be inherent to high-skilled immigration itself, but rather linked to specific ways the current H-1B system can be exploited for cost-cutting in certain contexts.
So the crucial distinction might be how the visa is being used. Is it for truly specialized, high-value talent that's hard to find domestically, or is it sometimes used as a substitute for readily available labor, just at a lower cost?
That seems to be the crux of the economic debate. Is it filling a genuine skill gap or enabling wage arbitrage? The reality is likely a mix of both, depending on the specific company, role, and industry.
And this links directly to the national interest question, doesn't it? What happens if the U.S. makes it significantly harder to bring in this talent, perhaps due to concerns about the latter scenario?
Well, the risk is throwing the baby out with the bathwater. If you restrict the flow too much, or if the system remains so unpredictable with the lottery and the green card delays, you risk damaging those key sectors, tech, healthcare, research, that rely on this talent pipeline.
You could inadvertently stifle innovation.
Exactly. If the leading U.S. tech companies consistently lose out on hiring the world's best AI researchers because they can't secure a visa, or those researchers get tired of waiting decades for a green card,
They'll go elsewhere. To
Well-
Canada, the UK, Germany, wherever, offers a more predictable path.
Precisely. And that's not a hypothetical risk. We're seeing other countries actively creating visa programs designed specifically to attract the talent frustrated with the U.S. system. Canada's global skill strategy, offering 2-week processing for some tech roles, is a prime example. The U.S. system's unpredictability itself becomes a competitive disadvantage. We risk a brain drain, not because the talent doesn't want to come here, but because the process is too uncertain and too slow.
Okay, let's shift focus slightly to the worker's perspective again, but analyze the broader impact. We talked about the personal stress, but what's the economic cost of keeping highly skilled people in this state of limbo for years, even decades?
The economic cost is significant, though sometimes hidden. First, there's the retention issue. When a company invests in recruiting and training a highly skilled H-1B worker and then loses that worker after a few years because their visa runs out, or they get lured away by a country with better green card prospects, that's a huge loss of investment and institutional knowledge for the company. Replacing high-skilled workers is expensive recruitment costs, training time, lost productivity.
So instability for the worker translates to higher costs and lower productivity for the employer.
Often, yes. And then there's the impact on labor market dynamism. The U.S. economy thrives on mobility, people changing jobs to find better opportunities, which drives wages up and allocates talent efficiently. But if a large segment of your high-skilled workforce feels stuck with their initial sponsoring employer due to green card ties,
They can't participate fully in that competitive labor market. It potentially suppresses their wages and prevents them from moving to roles where they might be even more productive.
exactly, it creates an artificial rigidity. You have highly talented people potentially underemployed or stuck in roles they've outgrown simply because the immigration system penalizes mobility. That's
Wow.
not just bad for them, it's inefficient for the economy as a whole. The uncertainty and lack of mobility likely mean the U.S. isn't getting the full potential contribution from these workers.
It's like attracting top athletes and then making them play with one hand tied behind their back.
That's not a bad analogy. You're bringing in top talent, but then constraining their ability to fully utilize that talent within your economy.
Okay, looking ahead then, reshaping the future. We discussed the push towards a merit-based system instead of the lottery. Let's game that out. If the U.S. did switch, say, primarily to a wage-based selection system, who wins and who loses?
Well, the clear winners would likely be companies in high-paying industries that need very specialized, high-end talent. Think big tech firms hiring experienced AI engineers, specialized finance roles, high-level pharma researchers. They can afford to offer top dollar, so their candidates would shoot to the top of a wage-based ranking.
So it would funnel the limited visas towards those perceived highest value roles, economically speaking.
Correct. It would likely ensure that the 85,000 slots go to jobs commanding premium salaries, directly addressing the wage suppression critique by design. It becomes explicitly a system for attracting the best and brightest, defined largely by earning potential.
Okay, who potentially loses out in that scenario?
The potential losers could be sectors that do crucial work but don't necessarily offer top-tier private sector salaries. Think about universities hiring postdocs for fundamental research, nonprofits working on critical social issues, or even government labs.
So, important but less commercially lucrative roles might find it much harder to compete for H1B talent.
Exactly. A brilliant scientist willing to work for a university salary on basic cancer research might lose out to a moderately skilled software engineer offered a higher salary at a tech firm. A purely wage-based system risks skewing talent allocation away from important public interest work towards purely commercial applications. You could create a brain drain within the U.S. economy itself.
That's a really interesting unintended consequence. So finding the right merit criteria is just as important as deciding to use merit at all.
Absolutely. Is it just salary? Or a point system combining salary, education levels, specific skills, maybe location, like underserved areas? Designing a fair and effective merit system is incredibly complex.
And wrapping up this analysis, what are the biggest long-term implications if the U.S. doesn't significantly reform its high-skilled immigration system? If we basically stick with the status quo, the low cap, the lottery, the decades-long backlogs.
The biggest risk, frankly, is a gradual erosion of U.S. leadership in innovation and technology. Other countries are actively learning from the U.S. system's shortcomings and designing more nimble, predictable, and attractive pathways for global talent.
So inertia becomes a strategic disadvantage.
Yes. If the U.S. continues to be perceived as a place where even the most highly qualified individuals face years of uncertainty, bureaucratic hurdles, and potential separation from family, the very best talent will increasingly choose to go elsewhere. We might not see a sudden collapse, but a slow, steady leakage of the human capital that has historically powered American economic growth and technological breakthroughs. It's essentially choosing to build roadblocks for the innovators you claim you want to attract.
Self-inflicted wound, as you said earlier.
Potentially, yes. The future of key industries could be shaped by whether the U.S. fixes these structural problems or allows bureaucratic paralysis to effectively outsource innovation.
So if you had to distill this entire complex issue down to one final key insight for our listeners, what would it be?
I'd say the H-1B visa and the debates around it are much more than just technical immigration policy. It's really a barometer. It measures how the U.S. views its relationship with global expertise, how it balances economic needs with domestic concerns, and ultimately how serious it is about competing for the talent that will drive future growth. The decisions made or not made about the cap, the selection process, and especially that green card backlog will significantly shape America's economic and innovative trajectory for decades to come. It's a bellwether.
A bellwether for future competitiveness. That's a powerful way to put it. It really highlights the stakes involved. #55. Outro. Well, that brings us to the end of our exploration today. We've really unpacked the H-1B visa, looking at how it works, why it's so crucial for sectors like tech and healthcare.
And also why it generates so much debate around fairness, wages, and its impact on American workers, that fundamental tension.
Absolutely. It's that balancing act between needing global talent and protecting the domestic workforce. High stakes, as you said, with no easy answers.
Definitely not.
So before we go, a final provocative thought for you, our listeners, to chew on. If the U.S. system for high-skilled workers remains as restrictive or unpredictable as it is, especially with the green card delays, where does that top-tier global talent actually go? And what's the real long-term cost, not just in economic terms, but in lost potential, lost discoveries of that brain drain?
Something to consider for sure.
Indeed. In our next episode, we'll be unpacking the science and stories around Huntington's disease, a rare but devastating genetic disorder that's sparking new conversations in medicine and society. We hope you'll join us then.